All right. Thanks, everybody. Good to be with you. We were all cringing back there because we didn't realize our bios were so long. I think those were stripped off LinkedIn, or we would have shortened them. So really excited to have our panelists today who just got introduced. The title, kind of provocative, right? Numbers versus the noise. And we're going to kind of get into a few different topics. So in my role at our company, we're helping a lot of companies think through now the reporting alongside their decarbonization roadmaps, et cetera. If I go back in time, a lot of companies started making, the pledge, right? Yeah, we're committed to 2050 net zero. The scientists are saying that's what we all need to say and do, and we did that. Over the last few years, we've seen a lot more scrutiny, around greenwashing, and fast forward even the last couple of years, we've got, CSRD, right, in Europe requiring a lot more disclosure. We've got SEC proposals, which I'm pretty sure are going to be finalized in the next couple months, which is a totally different ballgame, right? Versus putting your sustainability information out voluntarily. You choose what you disclose. You kind of pick your own, estimates and methodologies. You don't have to do Scope 3 if you don't want. You do that every 6 months in the summer. Now it goes into financial statement integrity that you do the first few weeks of the year under audit, putting officers, basically liable like they are. If you remember kind of Enron, we had this whole new thing in financial reporting. Now we're putting our officers liable for what we're disclosing around ESG issues and numbers. So I can tell you, working with a lot of companies, this is kind of rapidly creating a little bit of, in some cases, controlled chaos. But I think if our goal is to move more companies or to create more accountability for achieving goals, like that's going to happen. And so I think it's really interesting. And as I say that, Josh, I'm going to start with you. I've seen a couple companies recently, if you look at headlines, and I hope this doesn't happen too much. But as we now have more accountability for when we make a commitment, that we disclose more transparently how we're getting there, how we're progressing, what it's going to cost us. One set of companies maybe that doesn't have extremely or robust plans on there may be tempted to sort of back away, particularly with this extra scrutiny and transparency. I hope more companies don't do that, and we heard from a couple today that are certainly not. And Josh, even as of a couple days ago, right? This is fresh off the press. Mm-hmm. You guys have kind of continued to double down. You announced a recent goal of 100% renewable energy in your operations, diverting 95% of waste from landfills, reducing water withdrawals by 20%, and most importantly, your net zero emissions by 2032, right? So the scientists said 2050. You guys are pushing it even further voluntarily. How do you guys decide to do this? I can't imagine this is just, two people sitting in a room saying, let's just make a good, PR statement, given everything I just talked about.
Yeah, it's a good point. It may look like odd timing for us to come out with our most ambitious sustainability commitments ever, and it is a little bit, but I think that's a reflection of the fact that our sustainability program, which is actually less than 5 years old at Western Digital, has from the very beginning been focused on making commitments that we are very, very confident we can achieve. And so data integrity has been a really foundational part of our approach, as well as focusing on materiality assessments and really trying to drive sustainability that is tied to long-term corporate value, and to make sure that when we make a commitment, we have a plan to get there. And we're lucky to have an executive team that understands sustainability, understands the value that it can bring to the company. And for example, our COO has created a sustainability team himself that helps run execution of these things. And they did a fantastic job wargaming, figuring out, okay, we want to be net zero. And from the beginning, companies, you want to set that ambition really high. You want to go all the way. You want to go to net zero as quickly as you can and make those other commitments. And some companies do that without having a plan. But I've been really impressed with our team, and we're a company full of engineers, so we're all about the planning and working things out, making sure all the math works. But we've developed some expertise that allowed us to say, yes, we have a plan, we have line of sight, we know how to get to this now. And so as soon as we had that line of sight, we were able to make the commitment. And it's going to take some investment, and that's challenging to do in uncertain economic times. But like I said, when you've got that executive commitment and you actually have the plan that allows you to get from A to B, it makes it happen.
I like a lot of what you said. In the uncertain economic times, right? And for a lot of, particularly in this sector, even when other sectors historically have, the oil, the energy sector, right? Remember when oil was negative $1 or something, Silicon Valley was still generally booming. This is kind of the first time I'm seeing pressure, layoffs, publicly in some of our largest companies. And in the rooms where we're talking about climate investments and like what you guys have committed to, right? There is a cost associated with these things. And I think your point is really astute that the numbers do get reconciled, right? And this isn't just about doing good. This is doing the calculation of, again, sustainability, which is the name of this conference. Fahmida, we were talking backstage, and right now, again, the SEC disclosures rules are not final. A lot expect like scope 1 and 2 will be in there. So everything I said, what you've been putting out in your sustainability report now goes into the financial statement. And there's a lot, that means a lot of different things from a risk and otherwise perspective. You guys are also doing an inventory of scope 3 emissions. And if you guys had looked at the California bill proposal, like scope 3 is included in there. Don't have inside baseball on kind of where that will land. That had been proposed before, didn't make it through. But this is coming up more and more, and we're seeing large companies commit to disclosing and managing their scope 3. So how have you guys chosen to do this, right? Again, it's not required necessarily today by any body. And for those of you that don't know, right, scope 3 is basically my entire supply chain. So things that some would say are indirectly in your influence, but not directly in your control, like your own buildings and your own operations and your people. So, why have you chosen to do scope 3? You've also, made commitments to recycle thousands of plastic. Maybe I'll ask you about that one later, and kind of, is that a bottom line or just a, let's do good? But let's focus on the scope 3 for a second.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. For those of you who don't know Intuitive, we are a pioneer in robotic-assisted surgery and minimally invasive care. Every 16 seconds, somebody's getting a Da Vinci surgery done. So to date, we've treated and healed 12 million patients in our 28 years of existence. For us, patient care is always at the center, and now we are looking at the planet as a patient and looking at the intersection of patient care and planet care. So, for us, a diagnosis is very important in order to come up with a treatment plan, and you can't really have a complete diagnosis unless you do scope 3. So scope 1 is all direct emissions, scope 2 is all the purchased electricity and gas, but scope 3 is really where the work is. Goods and services coming to the company, getting manufactured, and finished goods and services going out to the customers and ultimately to the patients. So for us, it was really important to take the full scan. And as expected, any company that manufactures goods and services, scope 3 is really the largest share, and for us too. So we wanted to take an honest and true approach, stick to the numbers, and really have a full diagnosis. And it's served us well so far because it builds conversations with parts of the company, particularly with our supply chain, in a much more meaningful and long-term way. So scope 3 sounds scary, but doing it can actually be very liberating for the operational and metrics-driven target for the company.
I think it's a great point. One of the things I've seen around scope 3 is, and if you look at the banking, know your customer laws, right? You can't just provide funding to, certain stakeholders in other countries without having some, understanding of who they are and potentially where the money's going to use. This is kind of gets into like know your supplier,
Yeah.
right? I can't just turn a blind eye and say, hey, look, in my four walls, we're really, green, we're using renewable energy, yet I'm sourcing materials for my products in, places that either have a ton of emissions and or bad work conditions, et cetera. So I think what we're seeing is a lot more insight into the supply chain, like you talked about, being a large benefit beyond just wanting to measure, right? But the measurement can drive the better understanding. You also made a commitment around recycling thousands of pounds of plastic. Again, this is not required, but you guys set the goal. Now you'll presumably be held accountable to achieve it. Was this a bottom line calculation? Hey, if we recycle this plastic, it's going to save us this money. Was it we think this is going to be part of our story and brand that we want to promote? Some combination of all things?
Yeah, I wasn't there when some of those goals got set. I can only imagine, having met all the brilliant engineers and scientists in the company, that it had to be a combination of cost and efficiency. And plastics get talked about a lot, but again, focusing on the supply chain and where actually the embedded carbon and the purchased carbon is coming from. It's okay to start with a practice that maybe because of cost reasons, but for it to scale, you really have to do it for the betterment of the company, the continuity, and the finding efficiencies. So yes, we do recycle a lot of plastics. Also, our instruments have many lives, so they last as long as they can as part of the fantastic system it is. And we all know for ESG and sustainability, the decisions are on purpose, multi-criteria. It is good for the planet, it is good for the business or cost avoidance, and it somehow has to have an efficiency and growth factor for all those who build it together. So doing it for the cost is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as they're combined with other criteria that bring E, S, and G together.
That's great. And I want to bring Molly into the conversation, sitting up here very patiently. Molly has kind of a unique perspective. So whereas you guys are in charge of significant decision-making around sustainability at your clients, I work with a lot of companies in the space. Molly, you were a tech journalist, podcaster, now have your own podcast, episode 4 coming out, I think soon, which is pretty cool, yesterday, and an investor. Right, and I think what we've always seen Silicon Valley, I mean, I moved here 8 years ago, one of the most exciting things is what Governor Newsom was talking about, right? Just the amount of innovation, the capitalism, the venture capital, and the capital allocation that happens. There's a major, if you look at a graph, uptick over the last 5 to 8 years in climate-related, companies, technologies, et cetera. What do you think about kind of the LP and VC market right now as it relates, and why is there so much interest and attention kind of in this space from a capital allocator perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And you make the good point that I was a journalist who moved into venture capital, and that was a very specific determination that this is fundamentally the biggest business story on the planet. It's also the biggest business opportunity on the planet. And, I don't want to be a mercenary about it, but it's a really good incentive system. It works. And that there will be innovations that we need in order to mitigate and adapt to global warming. And there will be innovations that companies need to adopt because they're not in a position to build them themselves. We have, without question, seen, and I think it's a result of a lot of different things, a huge influx into venture capital around the climate tech space. I think actually in 2022, even though you wouldn't have thought so, certainly in 2021, it was more money than crypto. So I'm taking that as a win. I don't know if it's going to be more money than AI this year or next, but it has been a huge, many tens of billions of dollars investment category for venture capital in particular. And I think it's probably because of a number of things. COVID was 100% a wake-up call. I can't tell you how many people I talked to who decided in the wake of COVID, because I think it was a sort of collective realization that the worst case can occur, that they wanted to move into something more meaningful with their lives and pivot to climate, maybe start a company in that space. You saw a lot of venture capitalists do the same thing, and frankly, the fires that we had were also a huge catalyst for people. When they woke up and the sun had not come up, which is the case on the Eastern Seaboard right now, a lot of people said, hey, I think this is probably kind of a big deal. And here, maybe I'm a VC who's already made all my money, and this is my opportunity to pivot into climate. And as a result, we have seen, billion-dollar funds be raised and a massive amount of investment kind of across stages of venture.
You mentioned AI, and so, just to bring in one other, big trend in Silicon Valley right now, and all you hear about, is there a, now we're prophesizing a little bit, but is there a role for, generative AI, maybe specifically in this? Because I tell you, some of the companies I've been talking about are thinking about decarbonization roadmap, right? There's hundreds of projects they could undertake in literally hundreds of locations, and what's the most financially optimal way to get there? It's hard math and analysis, and do you see these joint, opportunities or these joint things coming together to help on the sustainability space?
It's a really interesting time, of course, around, in this entire conversation about generative AI and AI in general. Certainly, climate, you just talked about, Josh, it's a data challenge, without question. It's a prediction challenge, it's a kind of modeling challenge, and all of those things can be assisted by AI. And I hear plenty of entrepreneurs talk about how it'll be a great way to maximize energy distribution. For example, we know that intermittent availability is a big part of solar and wind energy, and mapping peak usage and electricity is something that everybody wants to outsource to the machines, and there's unquestionably opportunity there. The availability of a lot of compute power is, for example, an opportunity to come up with new materials design, maybe think about new battery chemistries, or be able to model them really efficiently. Although I have to say, a lot of the VCs I know think that quantum will be better than that for AI. All of that has to be balanced against the fact that it consumes a ton of energy. It really does. And that as we create more and more and more inexpensive electrons on the planet with solar and wind, we consume them almost as fast with new technologies and with data centers. And listen, I know some great companies who are working on super innovative chip design and increasing the surface availability of an individual piece of microelectronics almost infinitely with lasers, so that you can air cool it instead of water cool it. There will be technologies that develop in parallel to make some of that computing less energy intensive, but make no mistake, it's not as bad as Bitcoin, but it's a burner.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's hard to balance all these different things. One of the other pressures, and kind of bringing everyone back in, there's a lot more politicization, or there's a lot more politics around ESG, right, and sustainability, right? You've got governments in certain states, mandating that, their pension assets cannot be invested in something that has an ESG or sustainable tag, right? Kind of their justification is, we want to make investments based on what is likely to drive the highest ROI, and we don't want to limit that to certain qualifications. And you can see a lot on both sides out. It's really heated. I think what I'm seeing now on the pro, let's actually fix climate, pro ESG side, if you will, is getting a little bit sharper in terms of how we talk about it, right? And maybe not just merging all these issues together. There's a ton under ESG, right? We had the acronym created a long time ago, and for better or worse, these issues kind of can get conflated. What do you think, Fahmida? Because I know we talked about this in terms of, do we need to be sharper as we continue to articulate, hey, when I say, instead of just saying ESG issues, I'm talking about climate, right? I'm talking about diversity and inclusion, and this is our strategy on that. I mean, are we better off starting to get more specific on issues? And Josh, you mentioned material ad assessment. To me, that's what that means. It's not every issue is equally important to my company or what we can impact. And is there something we need to do to just continue to sharpen how we talk about these things so that we can stop maybe tripping all this backlash from people or groups?
Well, finding common language for all audiences is always sort of the challenge. If we strip away the terms, the core values are actually the same in many cases. A good consulting firm once gave us a nice slide where we looked at, in the 70s, it started with license to operate. Mid-80s, do no harm, corporate social responsibility. Around 2000, consumers came in, they started caring. Investors came in, they started caring. Institutional investors said, well, we want to invest in companies that care about these things. So titles, sustainability, ESG, corporate social responsibility, they seem to be more fluid, but the core concepts about responsible growth, caring for others while we are growing our business and growing the economy and doing so responsibly by the planet, those are eternal, they're evergreen concepts. So yes, depending on the audience, we might want to address specific issues, but it's really good not to get hung up on the term E, S, and G. These are umbrella terms that bring a lot of concepts together. If we focus on actually what's getting done, how much carbon are we actually reducing, how many people are we actually helping, How much access are we actually creating? Those common metrics matter a lot more. So I think that's the true trend.
So we have some questions from the audience. I love how real time this is. Just got handed cue cards. So maybe
Then can we all jump in on that, the politics question?
Oh yeah, why don't you? Let's take it, please. Molly, go ahead.
I just want to piggyback on what
Yeah.
you're saying in terms of sort of how to frame this, because it has been framed as a social issue when in fact it's a capitalism issue, right? Like if you do more sustainable business, you're probably saving money, you're more efficient, and you don't pollute, and a lot of good things that almost everybody cares about. If you have a diverse workforce, you are likely to create products that appeal to more people, which is good business because you will sell to more people. If you have a company that operates with ethical guidelines and good governance, you are less likely to go to jail and get shut down. So I sort of feel like a big part of addressing this controversy, which is real and having billions of dollars worth of impact, and you're seeing pension funds actually sue in response and saying, if you want me to do my fiduciary duty to my clients, you cannot prevent me from investing in a way that I actually think is more responsible, and you cannot force me to invest in a class that is long-term an asset class in decline. Like if you look at fossil fuel investments, which by the way are currently funded, at least almost up to a third of that funding is coming from retirement plans and pensions, where people don't really know that they're invested in them and they don't have another choice. Yeah. And that is an asset class that over the long term is in decline and has a lot of volatility. And so I would just say, if you want to address the politics of it, use the capitalism.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think that's so spot on. And
Thanks. Just take that and run with it. Just go.
I think that's so spot on. Like, I think the best defense is turning this into, it is positive ROI. This is about our business. That's why I love the term sustainability, right? Because it refers to the ongoing operations of the company, future cash flows, and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. Justin, if I could jump in as well. On the controversy piece in particular, I think that part of the problem that we have is that there are a million bad ways to do sustainability, and probably a smaller number of ways to do it well. And some companies and institutions and people just are so passionate about it, they go out and do something without a plan. And so if you tie yourselves to the data, tie yourselves to your materiality assessment, really look at the long-term sustainability in that true sense of your organization, whatever it is, then it lines up in the long term with these incentives. It is possible to spend a bunch of money on a sustainability initiative that has minimal impact on the world, on the climate, on your business. And so you have to be very selective about that. And I think one of the problems that we have is making sure that we are branding ourselves in that very responsible sustainability way. And then also going back to the data integrity, making sure that when we're making a commitment, it's a true commitment. And not only is it tied to our business and there's a strategy behind it, rather than just saying something because I personally feel like this is my mission, but also making sure that you've got the data to back it up and that you know what you're going to do, you know why you're going to do it, and you can make that case to people so that they understand the thought behind this, because a lot of us are putting tons of thought into this, and it's a huge effort, but you can make the case for it if you sit down and you're very strategic about it.
So Josh, I'm going to build on what you said and tie in, the audience participation. So we've made these goals. We've got the data. We're committed to them. We think we can achieve them. How do you compete for limited resources, right, in this space? And I'll maybe translate that in how do you prioritize those? I'll translate that as there's limited company resources, right? In recessionary times, there's limited, great sustainability practitioners, that you can hire in. So just maybe thinking limited resources all over the board, yet you've got these really ambitious commitments that require a lot of operational alignment of the company. So how do you activate that?
So talking about internal resources, I think I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but going back to the data and making that case, showing the strategy, showing the long-term plan, will allow the executives to prioritize it in a way that's methodical, that's thoughtful, and appropriate for the business. If you look outside of that, as far as resources for talent or even things like renewable energy, so we have manufacturing locations throughout Asia primarily, and it's not like the United States where if you want a PPA or renewable energy, it's always available there for you. There are infrastructure challenges, regulatory challenges, But both from a talent perspective and the kind of constrained environmental, renewable energy and so forth, resources, that's a sustainable growth problem, what we're talking about today. We need growth there. And the market pressures that we're creating now by making credible commitments to sustainability, signaling to the market that this is where our company is going to create that demand, and then recruiting people. So many employees want to participate in sustainability. When we created our function, people just came out of the woodwork wanting to volunteer their time to participate in it because they're personally driven to do this. And people have transitioned their career, myself included, to one that focuses on sustainability because of the growing need. So as we continue to talk about it in a responsible, credible, positive way, people come in, resources come in, and you have that sustainable growth that we're talking about.
I love that. And that kind of, your story there is building off Molly's point. I mean, if you think about all the money that companies in the Valley have spent on having pool tables and cool offices, right? It's to attract employees, right? This is a way to attract employees. There's clearly a business benefit. It's kind of the carrot and the stick. Hey, our customers will be coming, right? So maybe it's more revenues. Hey, in the future, there's more taxation. Maybe we minimize that by minimizing our carbon today. We get loans at lower rates. I mean, I think if you really put together this P&L approach in terms of all these decisions, it can be a financial, business case, and then obviously there's the incremental benefit of, solving a problem that I think many people believe needs to be solved. So we have another question. I think this is good. Anyone could field this. So when it comes to creating internal alignment, and I'll send them internal alignment towards achieving the goals, and buy-in for the ESG metrics, how do you incentivize C-suite and the company to follow suit? And then they kind of go on to say, is it about tying like salaries to metrics, or presumably like bonuses to metrics?
I can take a stab at it. So, the metrics, if you're talking about the Global Reporting Initiative metrics or SASB metrics or others, they're typically standards and they're chosen for a specific industry. There's that initial work of trying to line up what are our company metrics and what are these metrics. Then comes the second phase where you say, actually, they are more or less the same, except this one is divided by gross square footage, or it's asking about intensity as opposed to just the raw number. That translation is the sustainability, ESG, and social responsibility group's job. There's definitely a translational element, but then comes the education and reassurance. In my 20 years of sustainability career, there's never been a barrier greater than just not knowing what the other person's talking about. So taking the time and doing that translation to showcase that actually your operational efficiency is more or less the same as the metric that would also count for an ESG metric, and rightfully so. So education creates alignment, and business case, first education, then business case, that creates alignment. And then I'm going to coin what you said, Josh, no random acts of greenness, right? Strategically streamline them and show that this is where, because ultimately ESG is a growth strategy for the company, responsible growth strategy. We know our metrics, they're aligned with what we're also trying to do operationally for the company, keep the margins, in check. And then if we do a few of these really good things together, we get to that proverbial point C, so to speak. So education is very important for alignment. Of course, you have to kind of find some early champions, but it's super important not to alienate any group from the start just because they may or may not be believers of ESG. Again, strip away the terminology. In its core, what ESG is about is actually what every good employee in the company is striving towards. They're just looking at it a little differently. So maybe I'm too idealistic, but it comes with conversation, persistence, business case, and a really good strategy towards bringing the collective together. And the last thing I would say is turn ESG into a decision criteria. It is a multi-decision criteria, but it is one. If everybody in the company, especially the C-suite, apply that criteria in addition to bottom line and employee retention, they will naturally arrive at a very long-term sustainable growth.
That's great. Before we get to final word from each of the panelists, any other just audience questions you wanted to?
You could hit us up after, too.
Yeah, you can hit them up after. Maybe they've all been written on these cards. So, really interesting discussion. The regulations are coming. The more disclosures coming. You guys are all doing things in different ways. Molly, through your investments, and for each of you is representing really large companies, setting trends for hopefully many other companies to follow suit. Maybe in like your final, 30 to 45 seconds each. Either one of the biggest hurdles that we still need to overcome as either individuals or as a group or society to kind of move the needle in this space.
Well, so I'll jump in because I think this piggybacks a little bit on what you were just saying, which is that I think the other part of my business, in addition to investing, is storytelling. And fundamentally, I think this is a really big narrative. Just when I left journalism for investing, I realized that there was a huge storytelling challenge around climate, whether it's these companies translating what it is they're going to do if they're a really hard tech company, or selling this vision to multiple stakeholders, putting things in terms that people can understand, and helping companies tell that sustainability story to those stakeholders in a way that makes sense and is palatable and helps them understand it a little bit better internally. I think that is a much bigger deal than I had even realized, which is why it's called Mollywood Media, and they're still publishing a newsletter and consulting and advising around that, because I think every conversation like this makes me realize that there's still really a hill to climb, I think, in terms of people's understanding and awareness of how this all could work and does work.
I'll just say that I think this is a really exciting time to be in sustainability, despite kind of the growing pains that we've had over the past decade or so in trying to figure out what sustainability ought to look like, what ESG ought to look like. We're making very rapid progress. So Western Digital is a 50-year-old tech company, and it's only in the past less than 5 years, like I said, that we've really leaned into sustainability and trying to figure it out. And I know it's the same story for a lot of our peers, that now is the time where we're really focusing our efforts. And it's a confluence of events that has led to some very positive changes at the company. Our customers, our shareholders, our employees, they're all asking us to do things that are very well aligned with our materiality assessments. They're asking us to do things that feel good to do, that are good for the company, good for the planet, good for our communities. And so, and you add on that the regulations that are coming and so forth. There's a lot of positive pressure that's creating interest in sustainability and creating opportunity for us to make very significant commitments. I can't imagine our company committing to net zero 5 years ago. That was, of course, what we wanted to do. But the fact that we were able to do it so quickly, I think, is a testament to the unique environment that we're in. And it's a very exciting place to be in for those of us who are really committed to planet and people.
Storytelling, I will stay with that. It's when ESG is seen as a separate thing that a company has to do, it becomes very cumbersome. Oh, another thing we have to do. One of the fastest way to gain consensus and alignment is to find what does our company or our product already do that might be in alignment with ESG. So sometimes it's a very quick find if the company is creating products for people and the planet. Sometimes it takes a while. In our case, when we looked into minimally invasive care and our patients go home, heal faster and go home early, the resources and the carbon that they're saving by not staying in the hospital the extra 2 days and returning to doing what they love with their families, that gave us a story of carbon avoidance, which then goes in terms of what we do today is avoiding certain things. But yes, we also have a bag of carbon and responsibility. Let's now decarbonize them step by step. It creates a certain inspiration that is no longer a bother, but rather, okay, let's do this together because we can solve this. So I think finding a storyline that's authentic to your work's day-to-day connection with your organization could be a great point of alignment and further progress. It's kind of like you catch the East Asia current. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, panelists. You guys are great. Thank you, audience. You can come talk to any of us after this, and we appreciate the time.
Thank you.